Hello and welcome to the Aaron Roussos podcast. Today's episode, I wanted to touch on a few things that came up pretty early in my spiritual journey or awakening, whatever you want to call it, just personal development, knowledge, all that sort of stuff. Now, a lot of things happened back in 2018. 4 months when I was researching my ass off to heal myself, and I found out a whole lot of things that I had no idea about. And one was about the magnetic grid, and there's different grids, crystalline, all the rest of it, but we're just going to talk about magnetics. I didn't know that the whole galaxy was held together magnetically. Didn't know that there was a magnetic grid. I didn't know that the poles shifted, and I heard some of these things by different people, even by one channeler, and then I went back and did a bit of checking, and even on Google 2008 and 2013, there's a couple of times in our recent history the magnetic grid, the poles had shifted. So much so that they had to go and repaint all the runway coordinates for pilots at all the airports all around the world. And so that's proof, and that sort of, it comes back to that thing of where I say to you, look, everything should be known and can be known and will be known, right down to our very own divinity. And so on my journey back then, this is way back when I was just starting, and I was like, wow, so that's why we had, and if you go back and look at, this is fascinating as well, at the times when this magnetic grid shifted, and they had to change airport things. Before that, there was a surge in whales beaching themselves. Now, whales have their own sat-nav, their own internal guidance system from continent to continent. They go thousands of miles across to different places. And obviously, all the stories and the data from the whales beaching themselves slowly gets less and less as they get used to the changes. They make adjustments. Isn't that fascinating? That the magnetic grid of the Earth. Now, the one project, which very esteemed and a well-awarded, scientists and professors and stuff, group of them actually have the thing called the One Project, which is a measurement of consciousness, which means there's physics, which means there's measurement, which means there's manipulation, which means there's all sorts of things that we can do with consciousness, which is your soul part of you. And then there's a whole lot of other esoterical things, but I just wanted to bring up that point because that part of us, that consciousness also, can be measured. Magnetics, the magnetic grid. So they put up some satellites to measure the magnetic forces. Now, magnetics that you see, normal magnetics, it's just fascinating. And I've been really fascinated by magnets, even just from an early age. I've always had magnets for some reason. And it's funny how, all through your life, these themes, and then it all becomes a piece of the puzzle that gets you a discovery on the Earth that no one's ever discovered before. And where you thought your whole life was a failure and things. So these satellites that can measure the magnetic forces, they have had a couple of times in our history, even of late, with some certain things that has proven that our consciousness as people, that is now energy, that can influence not only the planet, Mother Nature, Gaia, who we're in coexistence with. And a couple of those, which once again, this is all stuff you can go and check. I'm not making this up, and I never ever share anything that isn't of absolute truth and can be widely things. Some things that I've said have been changed. I'll be to censor or to confuse the thing, but we're not talking about that at the moment. And I guess I'll tell you some of these times, and these are times where, what do you think changes consciousness? Chemicals is one layer, okay? And what I do with the healing is I get into that layer of chemicals, and everything's a chemical reaction, and I can sort of change that around. But consciousness affects it. Still 1/3 of a part of us as a human being. And so the first one was 9/11. And so these measurement satellites, we had spikes of 3 times the magnetic impulse in the grid measured from these satellites when 9/11 happened, and billions of people were all tuned in watching this horrific event on TV. Other times that have been broadcasted as well, I think that time when the 33 miners were underground, they got saved, that spiked 3 times as well. So if you know that, I know you can't understand the mechanics, the physics, the quantum physics, everything behind it, but as soon as consciousness becomes energy, which it is, there's physics applied to it, and so therefore we know how it works a little bit more, which is still emerging science, but still we're doing a bit of catch up. And as I've proven, the mainstream media narrative, whatever you want to call it, does not want to let these things out quickly or make an impact or make too much change. We're talking about slow change. 7 years ago, I healed myself of an incurable disease, and still to this day, not one mainstream media, newsroom, outlet, whatever, has even registered or recorded that they have received my information. Now, I'm sending them everything that can be tested on any human being, by just following a list of do's and don'ts, and after 14 days an incurable disease is cured, completely reversed, because I understand through this emerging stuff what causes things and how we work as human beings on the planet, and how the planet works and the system that we're part of. And this other magnetics one, it's just I guess it helps with how would I explain it? It just, with me anyway, it was like, I'd heard this thing, and then you go searching for these things, and it's all out there. Now, many of you sitting there listening to this right now would not know that, I think it was 2008, I know it was definitely 2013, that the runways, because of the shift of the magnetic grid, the poles shifted 40 miles or something, right? And it's been happening throughout history, but none of you sitting there now know that they went and repainted. Imagine how much that would cost the exercise. Repainted, how there's a coordinate on every runway in every airport all around the world, and they had to go and repaint them all. So that, it fascinated me for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't know that the magnetic grid changed. I didn't know that the planet was, the whole galaxy was held together magnetically, and there was this magnetic grid. But to have something so big happen, and yet none of us know, or, I thought I was pretty cluey with what was going on this planet, but to actually, that sort of blew me away, that I was like, wow, how come there's no advertising, or it wasn't on the news, hey, we're repainting every thingo. And so, this with, another 100 things like that sort of just was telling me a message that we're only shown what someone or what someone thinks is good for us to see. And the majority, everyone knows that the majority of what we see is based in a fear loop, and it's all about bad news, and that sells a lot better than good news. And so they'll throw in a bit of good news, but it's whatever they want you to see. So we're not totally this, the age of, even with the age of all the technology and everything that's going on, there's still many of these things that we don't know. So the consciousness, the grid, then to be measured, and the magnetic field of this planet to triple when a huge event where thousands of people die and it is broadcast and watched, and it's pulled on the heartstrings and compassion of billions of people, it affects the planet. Like, that in itself is pretty big to me. That would make me want to think a little bit further about what is going on. You know what I mean? As I say, before, I healed myself, I was a complete atheist, didn't want to have anything to do with it. And even though I'd studied physics and things before that, I was pretty practical, down-to-earth sort of a bloke. I never really got into that side of it. And so even now, with 7 years experience, I understand that compassion and kindness can not only change the chemical composition and chemicals within the system, which everything is in our biology, but also the planet, the magnetic grid, and there's other grids as well that we now know about. And so a lot of the things that we know, they need upgrading, right? They need and still, it makes a profound difference to our lives, understanding who we are and the goings on of what happens here. It really does. I could not heal myself of an incurable disease without knowing what was causing it, or having a pretty good idea, because then that's how you offset it, right? That's how you offset the disease, because you know what's causing it. So the first step is to take that out. So an elimination thing. Then to aid in the healing of each part of us, you have to know what each part does, the body, mind, and the soul. And the soul's very little is known, even by the so-called experts of the world that are in spirituality, as far as religion, all the stuff of it. They all preach about, the afterlife, reincarnation, but they can't tell you the system that we're part of and how it works and where everything's stored. But I can, because I had to work it out. And then I had to test it to make sure it was true. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here now, 7 years later, healed from multiple incurable diseases. So that's what I want to get on and just say, look, about the magnetic grid, go and check it out, and see what you think. It'll just open your eyes that little bit further. So this one's the magnetic grid. This is the Aaron Russos podcast, coming to you live from Australia. Have a beautiful day, night, morning, wherever you are. Ciao.